What if I told you the very thing you crave the most, pleasure, is slowly draining your strength, your drive, and even your wealth? That the dopamine hits you chase every day might be the reason your potential stays untapped. And that one man saw this coming centuries ago. Look around. We're overstimulated, overindulged, and underachieving. We scroll for hours, binge everything from shows to sugar, chase quick thrills, and call it freedom. But deep down, we feel stuck, lazy, anxious, unmotivated. Why is it that the more pleasure we seek, the emptier we feel? You've been told that pleasure is the point of life, that chasing happiness through comfort, entertainment, and luxury is the goal. But that's a lie, a dangerous one, because pleasure isn't power, it's sedation. And Schopenhauer, the philosopher often overshadowed by louder thinkers, warned us about this trap before smartphones or social media even existed. Picture a lion in the wild, agile, fierce, powerful. Now picture that same lion in a zoo, fed daily, safe, entertained, but neutered, docile, depressed. That's what modern comfort is doing to you. You're no longer the hunter, you're the house cat. And here's the kicker. It feels good. So you don't even notice the cage. Pleasure trains you to avoid discomfort. Every time you reach for pleasure, whether it's a sugary snack, a quick dopamine hit from social media, or another Netflix binge, you're teaching your brain something dangerous. Avoid discomfort at all costs. The human brain is designed to seek ease and avoid pain. But in the modern world, this instinct is being weaponized against you. Instead of building tolerance to difficulty, you're reinforcing a mental pattern. If it's hard, skip it. But the problem is that growth only happens through resistance. Just like muscles only grow by tearing and rebuilding, your character only strengthens by facing and enduring discomfort. Schopenhauer believed that suffering is an essential part of life. Not something to be avoided, but something to be embraced for what it teaches. When pleasure becomes your default, discomfort feels intolerable. You procrastinate on meaningful tasks, avoid confrontation, and shrink from anything that tests you. Over time, you lose resilience. You become emotionally fragile. And worst of all, you stop believing in your ability to endure anything difficult. A life governed by pleasure becomes a life allergic to pain. And that's a dangerous trade-off. Because discomfort isn't the enemy, it's the price of real strength. Pleasure weakens your willpower. Through dopamine dependency, willpower is like a muscle. Use it often and it grows. Abuse it and it atrophies. When you're constantly surrounded by easy pleasures, notifications, fast food, online shopping, you're bathing your brain in dopamine. Each hit feels good. But behind the scenes, something subtle is happening. Your baseline for satisfaction is rising. What once made you happy now feels dull. You need more stimulation to feel the same high. This is dopamine dependency. The more you chase pleasure, the less willpower you have to resist it. Schopenhauer understood this long before neuroscience caught up. He argued that our desires enslave us, and that the constant pursuit of gratification only leads to suffering. Modern science agrees. Each time you give in to a small pleasure, you make it harder to resist the next. The muscle of self-control weakens, and once that goes, discipline follows. And without discipline, long-term success becomes almost impossible. You're no longer in control of your mind. Dopamine is. Pleasure makes you passive instead of active. Pleasure feels like you're gaining something, but often, you're losing more than you think. The more time you spend consuming videos, games, food, entertainment, the less time you spend creating. And this slowly turns you from an active participant in your life to a passive observer. You start watching other people live their dreams instead of building your own. You cheer from the sidelines instead of stepping into the game. Schopenhauer called this the illusion of satisfaction. When you're absorbed in pleasure, it feels like you're full, but it's an illusion. It's mental fast food, temporarily satisfying but ultimately empty. True satisfaction comes from doing, not consuming, from effort, not ease. Passive pleasure starves your soul of the nutrients it needs to grow, and slowly you forget how to move forward. You forget how to act. You become a spectator in your own life, and no amount of pleasure can fill the emptiness that follows. Pleasure rewires your brain for short-term gratification. Your brain is a prediction machine. It learns patterns and adjusts behavior accordingly. If every time you're bored you grab your phone and scroll, your brain learns. Boredom, but pleasure fix. This sounds harmless until you realize what's happening. Your brain is being rewired to expect rewards with zero effort. Short-term gratification becomes the rule. Long-term thinking? That becomes foreign. Schopenhauer's philosophy warned that the human tendency to chase fleeting desires leads to disappointment and a shallow life. He believed that happiness rooted in pleasure is always temporary, because desire renews itself endlessly. Neuroscience now echoes that warning. The more you train your brain to expect instant rewards, the harder it becomes to focus, work, or persevere. The wiring for patience, focus, and perseverance slowly fades. And suddenly, even small tasks feel unbearable unless there's a reward immediately attached. You've trained yourself to be impatient with life itself. Pleasure kills ambition by satisfying you prematurely. Ambition is born in hunger, in the gap between where you are and where you want to be. But pleasure short-circuits this. It gives you a taste of the reward without earning it. You watch a motivational video and feel productive. You scroll through luxury lifestyles and imagine success. You eat junk food and feel comforted. But none of this brings you closer to your goals. In fact, it tricks your brain into thinking you're already closer than you are. It satisfies your hunger prematurely. And without hunger, ambition dies. Schopenhauer believed that human striving was the essence of life, but also its curse. He saw that when we believe our desires are satisfied, we become stagnant. And in modern times, this curse is everywhere, from simulation games that fake achievement to curated lifestyles that give you false hope. Pleasure is sedating your drive. It's whispering you're doing fine when you're really falling behind. Real progress is slow, difficult, and often thankless. But it's also the only kind that matters. When pleasure becomes your compass, you stop chasing the mountain. You settle for the mirage. Pleasure numbs emotional depth and makes life feel shallow. There's a reason why the more you indulge in surface-level pleasure, the more hollow life can start to feel. Emotional richness doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from experiencing the full range of human emotion. Pleasure, when constantly sought, acts like a numbing agent. It dulls not only the lows but also the highs. You don't feel deeply moved, inspired, or connected anymore. You just feel flat. Schopenhauer understood this as the consequence of chasing desire. He believed that pleasure, once obtained, quickly decays into boredom, and boredom drives us to chase more. But that cycle never leads to anything profound. It just keeps us skating on the surface of life. When your day is filled with small pleasures, snacking, scrolling, streaming, you're not feeling more, you're feeling less. Over time, that creates emotional shallowness. You start to fear silence, avoid introspection, and shy away from meaningful conversations. Because meaning demands attention, reflection, and often discomfort. But pleasure keeps you comfortable. And comfort, overused, becomes a cage that keeps you from growing emotionally, spiritually, even intellectually. Pleasure destroys delay gratification, the foundation of wealth. No one builds wealth overnight, no one achieves mastery in a week, and no one creates legacy without discipline. All of it, wealth, success, purpose, requires delayed gratification. The ability to resist now for something better later. But pleasure destroys that ability. It convinces you that you shouldn't have to wait, that everything should be instant: food, fun, love, money. Modern pleasure is designed for speed, and your brain, once it adapts to this speed, becomes less capable of patience. That's a problem, because real power comes from trading the now for the future. Schopenhauer believed that people are enslaved by the endless pursuit of the next desire, and that true freedom comes from freeing oneself from this chase. When you become addicted to immediate pleasure, you lose the mental muscle to resist temptation. And that makes long-term planning feel impossible. You'll spend instead of save, quit instead of build, consume instead of invest. You don't need a degree in finance to understand this. Anyone who can't delay gratification is handing their future over to someone who can. Pleasure traps you in the present, but not in a good way. Being present is often sold as a form of mindfulness, but the version that pleasure offers is counterfeit. It's not about presence, it's about distraction. You're not really in the moment when you're glued to a screen or sedated by dopamine. You're just trapped in a loop of temporary comfort. Schopenhauer wrote that people cling to the present only because the past is unsatisfying and the future is uncertain. Pleasure amplifies this. It turns you away from reflection and away from planning. Why think about your goals when you can just feel good right now? Why reflect on mistakes when you can drown them in noise? But this kind of presence is shallow. It keeps you mentally stagnant. You're not grounded, you're stuck. The deeper kind of presence, the kind that brings clarity, intention, and awareness, only comes when you remove excess pleasure, not when you overdose on it. True mindfulness sharpens your mind. Pleasure dulls it. And the more you numb yourself in the now, the less capable you are of building the future. Pleasure disconnects you from nature and simplicity. Schopenhauer often spoke of nature's quiet power, how solitude and simplicity were gateways to insight and inner strength. But modern pleasure pulls you away from all of that. It demands constant stimulation, screens instead of sunsets, processed indulgence instead of simple food, manufactured environments instead of natural ones. And with every step further from simplicity, you lose a piece of your inner clarity. Nature grounds you. It reminds you of scale, patience, and harmony. But pleasure divorces you from that. It makes you believe that satisfaction lies in the artificial, that your environment should always entertain you. But what happens when it doesn't? You panic, you feel bored, unsettled, lost. And that's the tragedy. Pleasure convinces you that silence is a problem to fix, not a place to grow. But silence is where ideas form, where self-awareness develops, where strength is forged. Every time you choose artificial pleasure over natural simplicity, you're choosing noise over clarity. And without clarity, your sense of purpose begins to blur. Pleasure breeds addiction. Through repetition, not intensity. Most people think addiction only comes from extreme behavior. But Schopenhauer would argue otherwise. He believed that repetition, not intensity, is the true danger. It's not the big, dramatic pleasures that make us weak. It's the tiny ones we indulge in every day. That afternoon snack, that 5-minute scroll, that one episode. They seem harmless, but they add up. Habits are formed not by what's intense, but by what's repeated. And the brain, being highly efficient, starts to automate these actions. Before you know it, your day is filled with rituals of avoidance, automatic responses to stress, boredom, or discomfort. And now, you're not choosing pleasure anymore. It's choosing you. You're stuck in the loop, wanting to break free, but always finding yourself back at the start. Addiction doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like routine. And routine, when built on pleasure, becomes a trap dressed as comfort. The scariest part? You might not even realize you're addicted because it's just part of normal life. But normal isn't always healthy, and comfort isn't always your friend. Pleasure makes you easier to control. This is one of the most dangerous truths no one talks about. The more addicted you are to pleasure, the more predictable you become. And predictability is the gateway to manipulation. Companies, platforms, even entire systems profit off your pleasure. Algorithms feed you what you crave. Ads track your behavior and tailor temptation. And while you're enjoying the hit, your data, attention, and even your decisions are being shaped without your awareness. Schopenhauer believed that freedom was found in detachment from desire. He saw that the more a person is enslaved to their cravings, the more they become a puppet to the world around them. Today, that puppet string is your pleasure. You think you're choosing, but your desires are being engineered. Your phone buzzes and you respond. A sale appears and you buy. A new show drops and you binge. Slowly, your autonomy dissolves. You're not living, you're being lived. True power is self-mastery, but pleasure makes you easy to master by anyone who knows how to pull the right string. Pleasure erodes purpose by replacing meaning with distraction. A strong sense of purpose acts like an inner compass. It keeps you focused, grounded, and resilient when life gets tough. But pleasure fogs that compass. It offers distraction in place of meaning. Instead of asking, "What am I here to do?" you ask, "What will make me feel good right now?" The tragedy is that the more you chase momentary highs, the less fulfilled you feel. You fill your days with entertainment, stimulation, and noise, but inside you still feel empty. That's not a coincidence. That's the cost of living without direction. Schopenhauer believed that meaning isn't found in pleasure. It's found in overcoming, in striving, in suffering with dignity. When you pursue purpose, you endure discomfort because you know it's taking you somewhere. When you pursue pleasure, you avoid discomfort and go nowhere. Meaning asks more from you, pleasure asks nothing. And in asking nothing, it gives you nothing in return. Eventually, you start to wonder why you feel so lost, why even success feels hollow. And it's because you traded your compass for a screen. Pleasure turns routine into a crutch, not a foundation. Routines can be powerful. They help build discipline, efficiency, and momentum. But when pleasure infects your routine, it stops being a foundation and becomes a crutch. You start depending on certain comforts just to get through the day. Coffee before productivity, music during every workout, background noise while you think. None of these are bad in isolation, but when they become essential, they're no longer tools, they're dependencies. Schopenhauer warned that habits rooted in comfort can become prisons. You feel anxious without them. You can't function without your usual fix. And over time, your resilience erodes. Life won't always follow your routine. And when it doesn't, what happens? You break down because you've mistaken pleasure for structure. The strongest people aren't the ones with perfect routines. They're the ones who can adapt when those routines fall apart. And pleasure, when overused, trains you to rely on the world being easy, familiar, predictable. That's not routine. That's fragility wrapped in habit. Pleasure makes pain feel unbearable. Pain is part of life, not just physical pain, but emotional, psychological, even existential pain. You can't avoid it, but you can build a relationship with it, one of strength, understanding, and acceptance. Unless you've trained yourself to only tolerate pleasure, then pain feels foreign, unnatural, even terrifying. Schopenhauer didn't sugarcoat reality. He said life is largely suffering, and it's how we respond to that truth that defines us. In a world addicted to comfort, that response is often denial. We try to numb, escape, avoid. But pain doesn't go away just because you ignore it. It waits. And when it returns, it feels bigger, scarier, more uncontrollable. That's what pleasure does. It shrinks your pain tolerance. It turns every small discomfort into a crisis. Every setback feels like failure. Every negative emotion becomes a reason to distract yourself again. But strength comes not from comfort, but from facing pain and surviving it. When you stop fearing pain, you start becoming unbreakable. And pleasure is the number one thing keeping you from discovering that. Pleasure teaches you that effort isn't necessary. In a pleasure-driven life, effort feels like a glitch, a bug in the system. Why work when you can feel good without it? Why try when you can simulate success with a click, a swipe, or a purchase? And that's the danger. Pleasure tells you that the reward doesn't require the journey, that outcomes don't need effort. But real life doesn't work that way. Schopenhauer believed that desire and striving are built into the human condition, and that we suffer when we try to bypass that truth. Modern pleasure tries to sell shortcuts, but the truth is no effort, no reward. You can't skip the grind and expect greatness. You can't avoid the struggle and expect strength. When you indulge in effortless rewards long enough, you begin to lose respect for effort altogether. You expect things to be easy, and when they're not, you give up. That mindset, more than failure itself, is what keeps people average. Because it's not that success is impossible. It's just that most people have trained themselves to believe it should be effortless. And that belief is the slowest form of self-sabotage. Pleasure undermines your sense of identity. When your actions are driven by pleasure, you start living in reaction, not intention. You're not choosing who to be. You're just responding to what feels good in the moment, and that slowly erodes your sense of self. Who are you really when every decision is based on comfort? When your mood is dictated by likes, notifications, or cheap indulgences? You lose touch with your values, your vision, your voice. Schopenhauer believed that most people live in a kind of dream state, pursuing one desire after another without ever stopping to ask why. That's what pleasure does. It clouds reflection. It keeps you moving but never arriving. And over time, you become a collage of reactions, not a person with direction. You borrow your identity from trends. You model your self-worth on shallow validation. And the deeper question, who am I becoming, gets buried under the noise. But without identity, there's no anchor, no compass, just drift. And the longer you drift, the harder it is to remember what direction you were ever trying to go in. Pleasure prevents mastery by rewarding mediocrity. Mastery requires patience, repetition, and the willingness to fail. But pleasure conditions you to expect rewards without sacrifice. You get applause for the bare minimum, validation for showing up, not leveling up. And that makes mediocrity feel like success. Social media is the perfect example. You can go viral without being skilled. You can gain followers without adding value. The system rewards attention, not mastery. But Schopenhauer knew that shallow victories don't satisfy the soul. Only depth does, and depth demands effort. When you let pleasure define your reward system, you stop pushing yourself. You settle for good enough. You avoid challenges that could make you great because they don't give immediate payoff. True mastery in anything, whether it's art, business, philosophy, or life, requires you to be okay with delayed recognition, prolonged discomfort, and countless invisible hours. Pleasure skips that process, but in skipping it, you never become great. You just become comfortable. And comfort for the ambitious mind is a grave. Pleasure creates comparison, not gratitude. Ironically, the more pleasure you chase, the less satisfied you feel. Why? Because most modern pleasure is comparative. You don't just enjoy your life, you measure it against others. Every scroll shows you someone richer, happier, more attractive, more successful. And suddenly what you have isn't enough. You feel behind, less than. And that creates chronic dissatisfaction. Schopenhauer described life as a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom. Pleasure, he argued, only gives temporary relief before tipping back into suffering. And when you measure pleasure against someone else's life, That suffering intensifies, gratitude disappears. You stop appreciating the quiet wins, the simple joys, the steady progress. Instead, you fixate on what you lack, and that mindset creates endless hunger. No pleasure ever fills it, because comparison always finds someone doing better. The only cure? Reclaim gratitude. Stop feeding the comparison machine. Step away from the metrics. Your peace doesn't live in someone else's highlight reel. It lives in your ability to be present and to be enough. Pleasure reinforces escapism instead of responsibility. There's a moment in every day where you face something hard, a conversation you've been avoiding, a task that challenges you, a feeling that unsettles you. And in that moment, you have a choice. Confront it or escape it. Pleasure offers the easy escape. It lets you run. You can binge a show, scroll endlessly, order comfort food, anything to avoid what's hard. But what you escape from doesn't disappear. It waits, grows, multiplies. And each time you run, you reinforce the habit. When life gets hard, I check out. Schopenhauer believed that facing life directly, without illusions, is the only path to true strength. Escapism, he would say, is a form of spiritual immaturity. Responsibility, on the other hand, builds character. It's in showing up, not checking out, that we grow. But when you're conditioned to run toward comfort, responsibility feels like a burden instead of an honor. And a life lived in avoidance becomes a life full of regret. The sooner you stop escaping, the sooner you start evolving. Pleasure blinds you to the higher forms of joy. Not all pleasure is weakness, but not all joy is pleasure either. There's a higher form of fulfillment, one that isn't based on dopamine hits, but on depth, meaning, connection, and purpose. Pleasure is fast, loud, and fleeting. But true joy is quiet, subtle, enduring. It comes from doing hard things, from building something that matters, from helping others, from facing yourself honestly. Schopenhauer believed that while desire leads to suffering, there's a deeper peace in transcending it. That peace is what we trade away when we chase surface-level pleasure. We miss out on the satisfaction of discipline, the pride of perseverance, the beauty of simplicity, the richness of authentic relationships. These are the joys that last, but you'll only find them when you stop numbing yourself, when you stop living for the next hit and start living for something higher. Because in the end, pleasure might feel like freedom, but it's only when you stop chasing it that you actually become free. Look at the most successful, disciplined, powerful individuals across history, from Marcus Aurelius to modern CEOs. They all mastered one thing: resisting pleasure. Not to be miserable, but to stay in control. Monks, philosophers, athletes, and high performers across culture, they all knew your strength lies not in how much you indulge, but in how much you can endure without it. So ask yourself, are you the lion or the house cat? Are you building a life of meaning or drowning in a sea of momentary pleasure? If this hits something inside you, it's time to take your power back. Start by cutting one pleasure today that's costing you more than it gives. Then hit that subscribe button, because here we don't chase comfort. We chase clarity, control, and wealth of mind, money, and life. Your future self is waiting. Choose strength. Choose purpose. Let's go.